Lesson 42, the fifth declension, idioms, stems of nouns and adjectives. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lenny's Latin class. Today we're on page 125, and the main thing we'll be talking about today is the fifth declension. In the last lesson we learned the fourth declension, and now it's time to learn the fifth declension, which is the last of the declensions. There are only 5 in Latin. So after this lesson, you'll know all 5 of them. There really aren't too many words here from the fifth declension, just a few common ones, and so we'll be looking at those. There are so few words from the fifth declension that when you see one, you'll remember what declension it's from, and you'll know to expect to see the endings of the fifth declension. So this really isn't too difficult. Let's jump in here to section 337 and let's get started. They're telling us here about the genitive singular form. It says, the fifth declension includes all nouns whose genitive singular ends in EI. Notice there with the EI, they have both a brev and a macron over the E. I think that's their way of telling you that the E in the ending could be long or short. In the next section, 338, they tell us about the gender of fifth declension nouns. They say nouns of the fifth declension are feminine except dies, which means day, which is always masculine in the plural and generally so in the singular. The way it's been explained to me is that the word dies, which means day, can be used 2 ways. It can be used to refer to just any old day, or it can refer to a special day, like a holiday or a feast day. So sometimes, depending on the way the word dies is used, you can see it shift around a little bit with grammatical gender. Let's go on to section 339 and take a look at the endings of the fifth declension. Let's start with the nominative singular and genitive singular. Dies is nominative singular, and then the genitive singular has 2 vowels adjacent to each other. It has diei. If I were an ancient Roman, I could explain to you exactly how they pronounce that, but I'm not an ancient Roman, so I can't. All I can tell you is to give each of those 2 vowels its own syllable, because they do not form a diphthong. So the E will be long and the I will be long, diei, something like that. Some of these forms will be easier to remember than others. The first difficulty is that dies is 3 of these forms, nominative singular, nominative plural, and accusative plural. So you have to use the context to figure out what's happening as far as what form it is. The ablative singular is not too difficult, da. That's similar to a third declension ending. Dative singular also, dae, looks similar to a third declension dative singular ending. One difficulty with that is that it's the same as the genitive singular. So again, you have to use context. Diem, accusative singular, not too hard because that's a standard third declension ending for the accusative singular. So you've seen that before. Dative and ablative plural look pretty normal with the bus ending, diebus. Not too hard to remember. And dierum in the genitive plural, similar to a third declension ending there. So take a bit of time here to get accustomed to these endings, and we'll practice with them in the exercises. Next we have the word res, which is an extremely common fifth declension noun. You see it all over the place in texts. The word res, generally speaking, means thing. Why do they say it means thing? Because it's similar to the way we use the word thing in English. In English, when we use the word thing, it's a very general, broad term that can mean all kinds of different concepts, objects. It can be used in all kinds of different contexts to mean all kinds of different things. And that's how it is with the Latin word res. Res can mean all sorts of things, especially when combined with other words. There's a good explanatory footnote here that's pretty important. Let's read that together. Footnote 1. It says race should usually be translated by a more definite word than thing. The context will suggest a better word, as fact, circumstance, undertaking, agreement, affair, event, etc. So the idea here is that when you're reading a text and you see the word race, you're not supposed to translate it as thing. You're supposed to figure out, based on the context, what the writer is talking about, and you're supposed to translate it in a way that reflects that meaning in that context. Sometimes when I am translating a text and I translate the word race as thing, I feel lazy. I feel guilty for not working harder to translate it better. Sometimes I do that just at first glance to get an idea of what the sentence is saying. And then once I understand the context better, I can, figure out a better way to translate that. So, quick review here. The fifth declension noun, race, means thing, but you're supposed to translate it in a more specific way that is suggested by the context. That's the basic story with the noun race. Again, we have the same form for nominative singular, nominative plural, and accusative plural. Those are all three race with a long E. And again, genitive singular and dative singular are the same, rei. Accusative singular and ablative singular, not too hard, rem and rei. Dative and ablative plural, not too hard because there's the bus ending. Genitive plural has um, so it's rerum. So depending on which form you see in a text, if you see race in a text, you'll have to figure out if it's nominative singular, nominative plural, or accusative plural. So you have to put on your thinking cap and figure it out a bit. Okay, so those are the endings. Some similarities to the third declension, but not in every case. Let's move on to section 340. It says dies and res are the only words having all the plural cases. Acies, series, species, and space, and a few other words have the nominative and accusative plural. So apparently we're not going to see all the plural case forms with some of these nouns. Some of them apparently are used primarily in the singular. One thing that will prove helpful at times like this is the fact that in Latin, the adjectives and pronouns all around a noun, that agree with that noun, they have to have the same case, number, and gender. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, you see dies, and it's being accompanied by the adjective longus. So it's a longus dies. That means a long day, right? Because it agrees with the adjective longus gives it away that it's singular. So dies could be nominative singular, nominative plural, or accusative plural. But by looking at the adjective that's modifying it, it tells you what case it is. So longus dies means long day, and that's nominative singular. If it said longi dies, then that would give it away that it's nominative plural, because you see that reflected in the adjective. If it says longos dies, well, the os ending on longos tells you that it's accusative plural, long days, and so on and so forth. Of course, you won't always have adjectives or pronouns or participles that tell you what's going on, but you will sometimes. And you can make good use of those to help yourself figure out what case and what form some of these nouns are. Okay, let's move on to section 341 and talk about some vocabulary. First on our list is actually a third declension noun, testis. Genitive singular is testis. It can be masculine or feminine, and it means witness. We have lots of related English words like testimony, testament. If someone dies without a will, they say that that person is intestate. So you'll see that root word in lots of related English words. Next we have acies. The genitive singular has a long E and a long I next to each other. So we have akiei, or something like that, for the genitive singular. And this noun can be interpreted different ways depending on the context. Sometimes you can translate it as army. Other times you translate it as one row of an army. Next we have space, which means hope. The genitive singular form is spei, with a short e there, followed by a long I. Next we have secundus, secunda, secundum, which is a first and second declension adjective, and it means second. This adjective actually can also mean other things like following, or it can mean favorable. In the last lesson, we talked about how sometimes instead of secundus, you'll see the word alter used to mean second or the other of something. If there's two of something, you can say the other, like alter. So when a Roman writer wants to say that something is second in order, sometimes they'll say alter, altera, alterum. Other times they'll say secundus, secunda, secundum. It's just something to watch out for. In fact, in the last lesson, we saw altera used in that kind of way. Next, we have the indeclinable number, vigenti, which means 20. This is where some of the other European languages get their number for 20. For example, if you go to your favorite coffee shop and order a venti, that means 20 ounces. Veinte in Spanish, I believe, means 20. Let's turn the page to page 126 and continue our vocabulary. We have dies, diei, which means day. We've already covered that one. By the way, you may have encountered the Latin expression per diem. If someone gives you a certain allotment of money each day to buy food, that's called a per diem. Diem there is the accusative singular form of dies. Next we have res, rei. We've already covered that one as well. That's the noun that means thing, but you're supposed to translate it as something more specific. Next we have an adverb shown in each of the 3 degrees, positive, comparative, and superlative. Aigre, aigrius, aigerime, which means with difficulty. It's related to the verb aigroto. Aigroto means to be sick or to be weak. Also, you'll see this adverb used in a kind of expression that means that someone's getting mad about something. For example, if you see it used with a verb that means to bear, like pharaoh or gero, if you see aigre fert, he's bearing it with difficulty. What that means is it's making the person angry, or it's making them disgruntled. Or with gero, if you see geret aigre, someone is bearing it with difficulty. That means that the person's getting mad. They're getting disgruntled about something. It doesn't always mean that, but it can mean that. Next we have comparo. That's simply the verb paro, which is a first conjugation verb. And paro means to prepare. So comparo with the prepositional prefix con. Of course, the N turns into an M before the letter P. This one also means to prepare. Prepare, arrange, procure. When you look at it, you might think, oh, comparo means to compare two things. And if you think that, you wouldn't be wrong. This verb can mean to match up two things or pair up two things. So it can mean, compare. But in this context, they're telling us that it's going to mean things like prepare, arrange, or procure. That's probably how we'll see it used in the exercises for this lesson. And finally, we have conficio. That's really the verb facio, which means do or make, along with the prefix con. And oftentimes with compounded verbs, you get a vowel change. So facio has the letter A there, but when you compound it with a prefix, that A turns into an I. So it doesn't become confacio, it becomes conficio. This is a very common thing to see that vowel change after a compounding of a verb. You see it also in perficio. Another one is the verb interficio, That's really inter plus facio. Again, the letter A turns into a letter I, and so it doesn't become interfacio, it becomes interficio. Another example is the verb constituo. That's really con plus statuo. So in the verb statuo, the A there turns into an I, and you get constituo. Another example is conspicio. That's a compounded form of specio, which means to look, S-P-E-C-I-O. Con plus specio becomes conspicio. So the vowel change that we see here in conficio is something you'll see a lot. When you have a Latin verb and you put a compounding preposition on the front, you can get a vowel change. Not all the time, but sometimes you'll see that. And the verb conficio can mean several different things. It can mean to finish a task, to accomplish it, to completely do it in the sense of completely finish it. Here, the idea of con doesn't mean with or together. It has the idea of doing something strongly. So the word con here as a prefix is strengthening or emphasizing the meaning of facio. It can also mean to kill in the sense of finish someone off. So lots of different meanings there for conficio. Before we finish our vocabulary, let's take a look at this last couple of lines they have here. They say synonyms. Achies can mean an army in battle array. Agmen can mean an army on the march. Exercitus can mean just an army in general. So we're going to see these terms thrown around. You know, Caesar's Gallic Wars is a work of literature that's, as the name suggests, it's about wars. And so you have lots of military terminology. And so we're going to see these terms used in different ways. And I don't want to go down a huge rabbit hole here about the specific meanings of these really specific military terms. However, it does benefit us to at least know something about these terms and how they're different so that we can understand what's going on when Caesar gives an account of an actual battle. So again, some of these words overlap in some ways, but we're going to do our best to try to figure out what they're saying in each specific usage. Let's move on now to section 342. That's our translation section for this lesson. Go ahead and turn off the recording and do all the exercises here. And when you're finished, turn the recording back on and we'll go over them together. Okay, hopefully by now you've completed your homework. Let's go through the exercises together, starting with number 1. Number 1 says, ob eam rem. This is not a complete sentence, it's just a prepositional phrase for practice. Ob is a preposition that can mean on account of. The object of the preposition is rem. That's accusative singular of the word res, one of our new fifth declension nouns for this lesson. And eam is a form of is-ea-id. Is-ea-id can mean this, that, he, she, it, or sometimes just the. Here, it's acting as a demonstrative adjective modifying rem. So we could translate number 1 as on account of this thing. Of course, we're not supposed to translate race as thing. We're supposed to translate it with some more specific word, but we have no context here. So there's no way to get the context that we need to translate it as some more specific term. So with no context here, we'll just go with thing as the translation, and we'll say for number 1, on account of this thing. Number 2 is next. Ad eas res conficiendas. I mentioned a few minutes ago that when you don't know what form a noun is, as with the noun res here, you can look at the words around that noun and see if you can find a clue to tell you what case and number it is. Here we have res, which on its own could be nominative singular, nominative plural, or accusative plural. But when we look at the adjacent words, eas and conficiendas, we can tell that it's accusative plural. So here's an example of what I was saying. Eos is accusative plural. Conficiendas is accusative plural. And so that tells us what res is. Why are they all accusative plural? Because they're the objects of the preposition ad, which takes the accusative. Here we have a gerundive, also known as a future passive participle. And in this kind of construction, the preposition ad can mean for the purpose of. Conficiendas is a form of one of our new verbs for this lesson. That's conficio, which means to accomplish or carry out or finish off. We can just translate it as accomplish. If we translate eos as these and res as things, then we can say for number 2, for the purpose of these things to be accomplished. Of course, that's not very smooth English. To improve our English translation, we can make the passive activity in conficiendas sound active and make res the direct object. That's a non-literal way to translate, but it does a whole lot for smoothing out your English translation. So for number 2, we can say, for the purpose of accomplishing these things. Quick review of future passive participles. They have 3 qualities to them. They have a sense of futureness. You could call it futurity. They have a passive quality. You could say passivity. And they have a sense of necessity to them. The idea that something must be done. Number 3 is next. His rebus adducti sunt. Our verb here is a compound tense, and what I mean by that is that it consists of 2 words. Adducti is a perfect passive participle, and then sunt is a verb of being. Together, they make a perfect tense passive verb. The verb here is adduco, which means to influence. And so adducti sunt says they were influenced. His and rebus are ablatives of means. Rebus is the ablative plural form of res, one of our new words for this lesson, and his is a form of hic, haec, hoc. So we could translate his rebus as by means of these things, or by these things. Again, we don't have any context to give rebus a better, more specific translation. So what we're left with for number 3 is this. They were influenced by these things. Number 4, eos rei populus Romanus est testis. The subject here is populus Romanus, that means Roman people. Est is the verb, it means is. Testis is one of our new words for this lesson. It means witness. So the Roman people is a witness. And then we have rei, that's the word res. Could it be genitive singular or could it be dative singular? Which one is it? Well, it's here with the word eos, which is genitive singular. So that gives us a clue that eos and rei both together are genitive singular. We've seen the word eos before, meaning his, her, or its. That is, of him, of her, or of it. And that is a common use. But here it's acting simply as a demonstrative adjective, modifying rei. Remember that eos is simply a genitive form of is, ea, id. So it has a demonstrative quality to it. So we can translate eos rei as of this thing. We have no idea what the thing is. We have no context. If we did, we could provide a better translation for rei. So what we have is the Roman people is a witness of this thing. And people here means a group of people. It's singular, so it gets a singular verb est. It doesn't mean people as in more than one person. It means people as in the population of a place. Number 5 is next. Is dies. Dies means day. That's one of our new words for this lesson. And dies could be nominative singular, nominative plural, or accusative plural. Which is it? Well, it's being modified by is, which is masculine, nominative singular. So that means that dies is also nominative singular. Again, the words that are nearby tell us more about what this fifth declension form is. So is dies will say this day. Number 6 is next. Caesar uno die id fecit, quod Helvetii diebus viginti aegerrime confecerant. There are two parts to this sentence. We have the main clause, and then we have a relative clause starting with quod. So let's take the main clause first. The subject is Caesar. The verb is fecit. That means he, she, or it did, or he, she, or it made. It's a perfect tense form of facio. And then id is a neuter accusative form of issea id. We can translate it as it. So that gives us Caesar did it, or Caesar made it. Uno and die together form an ablative of time. Now there are two flavors of ablative of time. There's ablative of time when, that tells you when something happened. And then there's ablative of time within which gives you a scope of time within which something happened or will happen. The word uno means one, so that points us toward ablative of time within which. If it said primo die, that would be ablative of time when. That would say on the first day or something like that. But we do not have an ordinal number like first, second, or third. We just have the number 1. So the idea here is within one day. So this is ablative of time within which. So our main clause says Caesar did it within one day. So it only took him one day to do something. We don't know what the something is, but whatever it was, he did it within one day. Now let's take a look at our relative clause. Quod means which. Quod is neuter, and it's singular and it's accusative. It's neuter and singular because its antecedent id is neuter and singular, but it's accusative because of the role it plays in the relative clause. It's the direct object of confecerant. Confecerant is a pluperfect verb. We'll use the word had to translate it since it's pluperfect. And again, that's one of our new verbs for this lesson, conficio. And it's third person plural. So we'll translate confecerant as they had accomplished, or they had carried out, or they had finished. We have another ablative of time when, diebus viginti. Remember that viginti means 20, but it's indeclinable. So no matter what form it is, it will still look the same. Here it's modifying diebus. So diebus and viginti together are both ablative plural, and they mean within 20 days. So here's the structure of the sentence, which is starting to form up a little bit. So what we have so far, with the word Helvetii as the subject there within the relative clause, we have Caesar did it within one day, which the Helvetii had accomplished within 20 days. So the idea here is Caesar got as much done in one day as the Helvetii did in 20. I guess he was more efficient or something. The word aegerrime is here. That's a superlative adverb. It's actually one of our new words for this lesson. Aegre, aegrius, aegerrime. So this superlative adjective means with greatest difficulty. Now there are a couple of ways we can smooth out our translation a bit. The syntax here and the wording is not English wording. It's Latin wording. So when they say Caesar did it within one day, which the Helvetii had done, that doesn't exactly sound like, English idiom or English syntax. So for quod, we could say that which. That can help smooth things out a bit. Another thing we can do is translate the ablatives of time within which simply with the word in. So we could say Caesar did in one day, and then, for the Helvetii, that which the Helvetii had done or had accomplished with great difficulty in 20 days. So instead of within, we can just say in, and that's a bit smoother. So still not a perfect translation, but here's what we have for number 6. Caesar did it in one day, that which the Helvetii had done with greatest difficulty in 20 days. Number 7 is next. Omnibus rebus ad profectionem comparatis diem dicunt. The main clause here is diem and dicunt. The verb dicunt is third person plural. It means they say or they are saying. And then diem means day. So literally, they are saying a day, but they're saying the day in the sense of marking out a day or appointing a day. As you can see from the footnote, footnote 4 encourages us to translate it as appoint. There is no dedicated noun here to be the subject, so we need to go with they as our subject. So subject, verb, and direct object will say this: they are appointing a day, or they are appointing the day. Now we have a big ablative absolute to look at. That's omnibus through comparatis. And within the ablative absolute, we have a prepositional phrase embedded in that. So omnibus rebus and comparatis, those three words together are an ablative absolute. And it says, all things having been prepared. Okay, omnibus means all or every. Rebus, that means things. And comparatis, that's one of our new verbs for this lesson, comparo, which means to prepare or arrange. So the ablative absolute could say, all things having been procured, all things having been arranged, all things having been prepared. Any of those, really. And we have ad profectionem here. Profectio is a third declension feminine noun that means departure. You learned the word profectio back in lesson 38, and there we saw it used to mean retreat. So it can mean departure or retreat. Here it means simply departure. Keep in mind that that noun is related to the verb proficiscor, which is a deponent verb that means to set out, to set forth, to depart, things like that. So we have profectionem here in the accusative, along with the preposition ad. And we can translate ad here as for the purpose of, or perhaps for. That's the thing that all the stuff is being prepared for, is ad profectionem, for the purpose of departure. Remember that the Helvetii are looking to make a mass exodus out of their homeland and go and find a new place to live. They want to leave Switzerland and head west to greener pastures. So that's where this exercise comes from. That's the storyline behind it. So number 7 will say this: all things having been prepared for departure, they are appointing the day. And in your English translation, you can throw in the word there, T-H-E-I-R, along with the departure, because the idea is that they're preparing things for their departure. The word there is not in the Latin, but it's understood. So again, all things having been prepared for their departure, they are appointing the day. Number 8 is next. Tota akie. Akie is a form of one of our new fifth declension nouns for this lesson. Akies is a feminine noun of the fifth declension that means rank or a line of soldiers. It's being modified here by tota, which means entire. So tota akie, both being ablative, could say something like by means of the whole rank. It's really hard to tell exactly what's being said here. It's not an ablative of agent because that would require the word a or ab. So I'm treating this like an ablative of means, by the entire rank. That's about the best I can give you. Number 9 is next. Prima ac secunda acies. Prima means first. Secunda means second. That's one of our new words for this lesson. Acies means rank or row or line. It's feminine. And as you can see from the footnote, ac is a shortened version of atque. So number 9 could say the first and also the second rank. Number 10 is next. ad primam nostrum aciem. Here we have two adjectives modifying one noun. The noun here is aciem. Again, that's the fifth declension feminine noun acies, which means rank or line. Primam means first. Nostrum means our. So number 10 simply says, toward our first rank. Number 11 is next. In superiore acie. Again, we have acies, which means line or rank of soldiers. Superiore means higher. That's a comparative adjective. And it all forms a prepositional phrase along with in. So number 11 says, in a higher rank. The idea of higher here is the idea that the smaller the number is, the more you are toward the front, the higher up you're going. If you move up from, say, the 10th rank to the 9th rank, you've moved to a higher rank. I think that's what's being said here. Number 12 is next. Crassus tertiam aciem misit. The subject here is Crassus. That's a person's name. Misit is a perfect tense, third-person singular form of mito, which means send. So misit means he, she, or it sent. So the subject and verb together say Crassus sent. And what did he send? The tertiam aciem, the third rank or third line. Aciem is accusative singular. So number 12 says Crassus sent the third rank. Number 13 is next. Helvetii ea spe deiecti sunt. The verb here is a form of the verb deicio, which means to throw down, dislodge, or disappoint. The four principal parts, deicio, deicere, deiecti, deiectum. We have related English words such as dejected. This is from the verb iacio, which means to throw or cast, with the preposition de on the front, which means, in this case, down. So de and iacio literally means to throw down. Iacio has four principal parts, iacio, iacere, ieci, iactum. Notice that in some forms of that verb, the I is a vocalic I, other times it's a consonantal I. That's why when it comes into English, it comes in as a J, as in the word dejected. So the verb here is a compound tense. That means it has two words. Deiecti sunt, again, notice the consonantal I there. That comes into English as a J, dejected. Okay, so deiecti sunt is formed by a perfect passive participle. That's deiecti, and then a verb of being here in the present tense. And the result is a perfect tense passive verb. Okay, so deiecti sunt says they were thrown down, or as the footnote suggests, they were disappointed. And the subject here is Helvetii. So the subject and verb together say, the Helvetii were disappointed. Finally, we have ea and spe. Spe is one of our new vocabulary words for this lesson. It's the fifth declension noun space, which means hope. Here it's ablative singular. And ea is a form of is ea id, also in the ablative singular, and it's modifying spe. Here ea is acting as a demonstrative adjective. And the reason that spe here is ablative is it's an ablative of respect. So if we translate ea as this, what we would get is the Helvetii were disappointed with respect to this hope. Okay, they had some kind of hope that they were going to do something, but then they weren't able to do it. So they were disappointed with respect to that hope. In English, we might say in. We might say they were disappointed in this hope. So let's go with that. Let's say for number 13, the Helvetii were disappointed in this hope. Number 14 is next. Domnorix summam in spem regni obtenendi venit. The subject here is Domnorix, that's a person's name. The verb here is venit. That's a perfect tense form of winio, which means come. It's third person singular, so Waynett says he, she, or it came. So the subject and verb say Dumnorix came. And then we have a prepositional phrase, in spem. Okay, so he came into hope, and not just any hope, but summum spem. We have the word summum here, which means highest. That's a superlative adjective. Notice that here we have the adjective coming before the noun it modifies. You see that often with adjectives of size or quantity. Like when someone graduates with honors, it says they graduated magna cum laude. Sometimes you'll hear people say it like magna cum laude. The word magna comes first, then the preposition, then the noun. And that's the same word order we see here, summum in spem, into the highest hope. And the highest hope of what? Of regni, of kingship. Kingship is a genitive singular, and it's being modified by obtenendi, which is a gerundive, otherwise known as a future passive participle. Obteneo means to possess. So literally, word for word, this sentence would say, Dumnorix came into the highest hope of the kingship to be possessed. But we can do things to smooth out our English translation. As footnote 7 suggests, we can translate winio in spem instead of I come into hope. We can translate it simply as to have hope. And as we've done many times in the past, we can smooth out our gerundive translation by making it sound active, even though it's really passive. So instead of saying of the kingship to be possessed, we could say of possessing the kingship. Okay, we turn the action described by the future passive participle into an active kind of thing, and then we make the noun there as if it's the direct object of that action. So number 14 as a whole could say this: Dumnorix had the highest hope of possessing the kingship. Number 15 is next. Omnes res ad bellum Helveticum comparatae erant. The subject here is the noun res, and the verb is a compound tense here, comparatae erant. Let's take a look at comparatae erant. That's a form of one of our new verbs for this lesson, comparo, which means to prepare, arrange, or procure. Here we have a perfect passive participle form along with a verb of being. What kind of verb of being do we have here? We have an imperfect tense verb of being. A perfect passive participle plus an imperfect tense verb of being adds up to a pluperfect passive verb. So it's going to be they had been something. In this case, they had been prepared. Again, that's a perfect passive participle combined with an imperfect tense verb of being. It adds up to a pluperfect tense passive verb. So omnes res means all things. Res here is nominative plural. So all things had been prepared, all things had been arranged, all things had been procured. That's what we have so far. Then we have ad bellum. That means for the purpose of war. And the word Helveticum is an adjective. It means Helvetian. I think in English you're supposed to say it like Helvetian or something like that. So literally, number 15 says, all things had been prepared for the purpose of the Helvetian War. We can smooth out our translation a bit by saying, instead of for the purpose of, we could just say for. So number 15 would say something like, all things had been prepared for the Helvetian War. So ordinarily, this would be the end of the lesson. Usually there's no material after the exercises, unless it's a reading from Caesar's Gallic Wars. But in this particular lesson, we have quite a bit of material still to go in this lesson. In section 345, they want to tell you about some linguistics stuff. that is, information about noun and adjective stems, that is basically linguistic in nature. In this lecture series, I have thrown in some information about linguistics, not too much, but just enough to answer some basic questions. Probably the most in-depth I went into linguistics was the lesson in which I talked about open and closed syllables and how to determine whether a syllable is long or short based on whether it's an open or closed syllable and the vowel length. So there we went into some linguistics, but the things they present here in section 345, it's really not all that helpful for where you are currently as a student. And in fact, linguistics can be very opaque and confusing for students. Furthermore, you might benefit more from getting that same information from a more modern textbook. So, for those and for other reasons, I'd like to skip over section 345. But there is something interesting to talk about in section 344, which is about idioms. What exactly is an idiom? Well, the word idiom comes from an ancient Greek root that means one's own. We see that same root word in other English words like idiolect. The word idiot contains that same root. The word idiosyncrasy has it. And the basic meaning of that root word is something that belongs to someone personally, something that is one's own possession. And so that's what they're getting at here when they say their definition. Let's take a look at the first two lines of section 344. It says, idioms, every language has constructions or expressions peculiar to itself, called idioms. And so when they say peculiar to itself, that really is at the heart of what the root word there means, peculiar to one's self. There are different ways to define the word idiom. They're doing it one way here, saying that it's peculiar to a certain language. But when you read this paragraph here, you start to get the idea that the way they really view an idiom is some wording of something that doesn't sound like the English wording. Take, for example, starting on line 5, where it says, Latin has many idioms. For example, it says, equus est Caesari. That's a dative of possession, with Caesari as the dative singular. And they say that's for Caesar has a horse. So that's kind of a shallow definition of an idiom. And here's the reason why. Because when an ancient Roman said equus est Caesari, for them it was just normal. They weren't comparing themselves to English. They weren't trying to emulate English. They didn't even know any English. I don't think English even existed yet. So when you read this paragraph, you get the feeling that they're saying that anything that's worded in a way that's not the way we would do it in English is, peculiar or strange. They don't come out and say that outright, but that's the feeling you get. So here is where this definition for the word idiom breaks down and doesn't really help that much. You almost get the feeling like the word idiom takes on a definition of strangely worded. But the question becomes, to whom is it strange? Is it strange to us, or was it strange to the ancient Romans, or to whoever speaks that language? If we say it's strange to us, that doesn't make any sense, because the Romans didn't, develop their language in reference to us or in comparison to us. Again, for an ancient Roman, using a dative of possession was completely normal. They would not have viewed it as an idiom. We see it as an idiom from a foreign language perspective, but to them it's normal. So I'd like to challenge this view of exactly what is an idiom a bit. One of my old Latin professors told me a definition for an idiom that to me really makes sense. He said that a true idiom is when the thing being expressed by a certain saying is not the same as what the grammar adds up to. When there's some meaning that goes beyond what is written by the words. So If you say equus est Caesari, there is a horse to Caesar, the grammar adds up there. It makes sense that to Caesar there is a horse. And so he has the horse. That makes sense. Iter faciunt, they make a march. That makes perfect sense. We don't really need to go beyond that to get the meaning out of it. So the way I'm defining the word idiom, those really don't qualify as idioms. But here is what would be closer, in my opinion, and the way my old Latin professor explained it. Here's a saying that really could be considered a genuine idiom. If someone asks me, hey, have you made up your mind yet of what you're going to do? And then I say, no, I'm still sitting on the fence. That is a true idiom because the way the words add up and create meaning is not what is being expressed. When I say I'm sitting on the fence, what I mean is that I'm still deciding, what choice to make. Will I get down on this side of the fence or get down on that side of the fence? So that's a real idiom. Something that when you add up what the words are saying, that's not what it's expressing. So that's the definition that I prefer for the word idiom, although you will see the word idiom used to mean any kind of special wording that you see in any language. That's also a legitimate use of the word idiom, but in my opinion, it's not quite as helpful, and it's even perhaps a little bit Anglo-centric, because there's a kind of a hidden message there that what we say in our language is normal, but what you say in your language is, strange and peculiar. So anyway, my point here simply is to broaden your thinking about what the term idiom means, how you look at idioms, how you look at different languages, and so on and so forth. So anyway, that is all I would like to give you for this particular lesson. So that brings this lesson to a close. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time in Lesson 43.